pleasure to meet with you, Madam Chow.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Over the years, I've had a great honor to hear you give us the history. Now, the history of Consolidated has been one thing, but you have given us historical content for our location as well as California in and of itself. So can we start with California? How it was named?
Oh, let's start with California. First of all, California everybody thought it was an island. And in researching Mexican Americans and Mexico, I discovered it on every map back in, say, 1011. They showed California as an island, even on Chinese maps. So, surprise, surprise, everybody had been here before Columbus. The Chinese, everybody else. And they had maps showing the Grand Canyon. But every one of them, and I do have copies of some of those maps, showed California as an island. So when the Spanish conquistadors came in and went to war with the Mexicans and captured Mexico, they renamed it España too. And the Spanish came in and basically created the caste system. And that caste system, they were actually what we would call back then Caucasians, and it went on down, and then going down the line to Mexicans until we got to what we call mulattoes. And those mulattoes were escaped slaves or just slaves that had bartered for their freedom, that had married Mexican women, and they were called mulattoes. To give you an example, the Picos were mulattoes. Now they call them Afro-Mexicans, but back then they were called mulattoes. So they all fled the Mexico to come to what we now call California in order to live without being discriminated against, let's put it that way, and their properties were being seized. So they came to California and populated California. Now the name California comes from Califia, which in Morocco or in Africa means queen, and the king is the caliph. So when they came to California, there was a black figure at that time who they believe was a seer. She was African and probably Moroccan, because the Moroccans actually helped fight the Revolutionary War. And if I tell you that story either, I won't digress with that. But anyway, they called her queen, and she was a seer, they thought. They thought she could see the future. And they, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. They thought she could see the future. And Carl. And so the Mexicans, who were diminutive in size, revered her. So they started to call California Califia as the queen, and California evolved from that. When you look at European history, they tell you, well, Califia didn't exist, she was a fake, and the Republicans went so far as to try to change the name of California when they found it was named after an African woman to Minerva. And Minerva was, of course, a Greek mythology person who probably didn't even exist. So they had a battle when Jerry Brown's father was, Ed Brown was, I think Pat Brown was the governor at that time. And they actually tried to pass a law to change the name of California, or the Republicans did, the Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside bunch. And the people, well, we'd have to change all of our stationery, we'd have to change our dresses, and they fought it. And so the people turned that down. It never really went very far. So we continue to honor Califia. There was a big mural of Califia at Disneyland at one time. There's a mural of Califia at the state in Sacramento. There's one up in Nob Hill. And they actually show the true Califia the way she should have been shown. Califia would have been what an African woman looked like. So they show her in her darkness and a head full of hair and real robes. And that's the Califia that, in Disneyland, I thought it was interesting to see the mural, and she had a weave, and the hair went all the way out here, like Snow White. So they did exactly. And Whoopi Goldberg presented her, and they've since taken that mural down, and California Land is there. So I don't know where that mural is. It would be interesting to see where it is. So that's how California came about its name. So let's fast forward to the Afro-Mexicans that came here. to California. All of them became multimillionaires because California simply had not been, there was gold here, there was minerals, and water, and everything that you could possibly want to start a farm or become super rich. So the people that came here, the Afro-Mexicans, the Picos, were being haunted, or I want to say hunted, by the Spanish government. So by this time, Spain is completely taken over Mexico, and they're calling Mexico España 2, calling it Spain number 2. Mm-hmm. And so they hired some Mexicans from Mexico, not from California, Mexico, which was the Sanchez's that our adobe is named after, mm-hmm. to come and bring law and order to California. In the meantime, Mexico annexes California. They never owned it. So then they annexed it and made it a Mexican property. Mm-hmm. So then we had the Sanchez's that were fighting with the Picos. So the Picos and people, the Californios, were fighting the Mexicans on one side and fighting the imperialists, Americans coming in from the east. So they're fighting, Santana and all of them were fighting a double war, fighting with Mexico and then fighting with Sam Houston and all the people who were in Texas fighting that war. So I don't want to go on too much longer with that, but that was the state of California when the Afro-Mexicans that were here, now Pio Pico owned from San Diego all the way up to Whittier. That's how much he owned. So when you're saying Riverside, San Bernardino, all of that, they actually were owned by black,
there we go.
by mulattoes at the time. Andres Pico, whose adobe is like 6 or 7 blocks from here, he was his brother, and he owned the whole northern half of the San Fernando Valley. Mm-hmm. His cousin owned all the way, say Ventura Boulevard, all the way up, past the Santa Monica, where the Getty Museum is. He owned all of that. And the adjacent land was owned by John Ballard, an escaped Kentucky slave. And his great-grandson went on to become a Tuskegee Airman and went on to become one of our presidents of the Consolidated Board of Realtors.
Mr. Ballard?
Mr. Ballard.
Yes.
And when the Night Riders and the Klan came to California escaping, once the slaves were freed, they all drifted to California to try to not live with have blacks be their peers or Negroes be their peers or slaves be their peers. Mm-hmm. So they came here. And so the Klan came here first. Now the Klan is, California has more Klan locations than any state. As liberal as we seem to be, there are more Klan locations in rural California than anywhere in the United States. So they still remain here. So there was a lot of assassinations of slaves and a lot of them thinking they escaped slaves, but the slaves were coming in right behind them to California like everybody else. So let's move forward, because the Picos died just like after the turn of the century, after the 1800s, like in 1901, 1902, they died. They were both of them, and there were more than the Picos that were mulattoes, but they were the most famous ones we know. The Sepulvedas, the Picos, those names that we're all familiar with. But they lost all of their property to the imperialist Americans. And they just came in and basically said, we're bringing white Anglo-Saxon law to the land, to California. And if you don't have an education, you can't testify in court. Well, they had no education. They came here. The Picos were second generation, Andres Pico and his brother. So their families came first. So if you go to Olvera Street, you will see the adobe over there, and they claim that's where Los Angeles started. It might have started there, but it burned down years ago, so it's just a replica. It's not the original adobe. That's why we keep saying ours is probably one of the original ones, because that adobe burned down in 1930-something, and Christine Lazar, I might have her name wrong, raised the money to do a replica of it. So that replica is all part of the founding of Los Angeles, but among those were 30-some mulattoes, including Maria Rita Sanchez. Her father owned Beverly Hills. It goes on and what we owned and what we lost. Now, when it comes to Mr. Ballard, the Klan and Night Riders would come every Friday because they had jobs. They had ways they got to work, and they would chase him up into the hills. Think Pepperdine. Think of that road going through Pepperdine. That's what he owned, all the way over to Agoura and all over to
Mr. Ballard.
Mr. Ballard,
Okay.
John Ballard, and John Ballard also was
Reginald Ballard.
no, this his great grandfather John.
John Ballard. Okay.
John.
Okay. Perfect.
And John was also with Biddy Mason, one of the founders of the first family.
Okay.
He doesn't get that credit, but he was one of the first.
Excellent.
There were three of them that founded the church, and because of the way she got her freedom, and that's kind of where he got his freedom. He was an escaped Kentucky slave.
Okay.
He applied for a land grant, and he got it. I don't think they knew he was blind.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he owned all that. So you can think Pepperdine and those roads that lead over to the 101 freeway. That's what he owned.
Well, that's awesome. So you gave us a very big landscape of history there, and I appreciate that because you're such a wealth of knowledge. One of the things is keeping with location-wise. We kind of touched where CBR is located, but we want to make sure that everyone who gets to review this understands that particular location. So can you give us history as to its actual location and how that changed from Western and so forth, like what the actual location was before?
The actual location of the Realtist was on Western. There were two separate locations. One was in a house on Western, and the second one, I have a picture right around the corner of it. And the second location was also on Adams and Western, not far from Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company and Mr. Nickerson. Their meetings were held, not in those houses, that's where their offices were, but at Golden State Mutual Life Insurance. Their first banquet was there. And Mr. Nickerson, who was a civil rights icon, broke a lot of barriers for the Realtors. And so they had their meetings there. And Paul Williams, who designed the Golden State Mutual building, also had designed a building for us that was going to be on West Adams. And then we began to break barriers with our attorney, Lauren Miller. Please, everybody, get the book about Lauren Miller. I think you'll be surprised to find out who Lauren Miller was and what he actually did. He was really a serious civil rights icon. But Lauren Miller was breaking the barrier in West Adams for Hattie McDaniels and those kinds of people and stars that wanted to live in those big mansions. And those mansions were all like coal miners and oil people built those mansions. And so he was breaking barriers, and what happened after that was the Crenshaw district, and there's a whole other story on Crenshaw, which was a later date. But when the people in the Crenshaw district, the Parkview Women's Club, could see that we were moving forward, and we were breaking through on Crenshaw and heading south toward Angeles Vista. Now, the street Crenshaw stopped at Angeles Vista. It didn't go all the way to the South Bay the way it is now. But they got a little frightened, and they were thinking, oh my God, it was a sundown house and sundown property, and blacks and Mexicans and Chinese could not be there after sundown, or you would be arrested and jailed. So when that building became available, they scrapped the plans to build the other location and said, this is a sundown house. I think it's symbolic. This is Paul Williams, the architect. And H. Scott Hudson, the Broadway Federal, said it's more symbolic for us to purchase this building and move into that rather than build this, gargantuan building, and it'll be something, but this is significant that we broke this barrier. And in getting that building, we continue to help to integrate, Baldwin Hills, Ladera, View Park. What am I missing?
Lamar Vista, Lamar.
And so we were breaking inroads into those areas along with the Japanese who were in Lamert as well. And so then that's how we ended up purchasing what's called now Consolidated Plaza. Along with purchasing that, it came a lot of responsibilities to tell the true story of what really happened, in 1949 when we started. And so we purchased it, and each person, each realtor, I believe some people say $1,000, some people say $500. They put their money up to be able to purchase the building. But our architect, Paul Williams and his brother-in-law, H. Clark Hudson, they had just recently opened Broadway, and they actually financed the building because we couldn't get financing anyway. No one was going to finance us there. So that's how that started. And so the realtors that actually started that were actually all became millionaires because they got on the bottom level and getting the apartment buildings, and Evelyn Reeves and her boss and all of these people who were early realtors were teaching financial literacy. I laugh when they say, "Look, teaching financial literacy." They were teaching financial literacy right there on Martin Luther King and Buckingham, which was back then it was called Santa Barbara. That's what the street was named. But Peter Dotrey, whose fortune went to USC, was teaching the doctors, lawyers, and sports figures how to hold on to their money, invest in their property. Don't just put it in the bank, or don't just put it in a hole. Please invest in property and let that property make money for you. So financial literacy was already happening with them. The realtors, just about the same time they moved into Consolidated, they created something called Sportsman's Realty. And the reason why it was created was because the sports figures were, a lot of them, like my dad, who was a baseball player, was semi-literate. You know, they didn't know, they weren't really counting money. They just had the money, they spent it. And so it was teaching them to, and a lot of the agents for all these ball players, like Will Chamberlain, and were cheating them. They would sell them a house that was worth maybe $35,000.
Double the price.
Yeah. And so we were teaching them that this is how we find out what the property is really worth, and if you deal with us, we'll make sure you get a fair shake. So that did happen with quite a few of the ball players, baseball players. Jackie Robinson opened a bank, Peter Dotrey opened a bank. They were all Booker T. Washington Republicans, is who the realtors were. Using that, open up the door. Thank you, James. I'll get it myself. James Brown quote. But that was his philosophy, and he was hated by a lot of blacks, a lot of black figures, because they wanted us to beg for money and take welfare instead of saying, hey, we want the education and we want to invest, and we want to invest in property, and we want to really realize the American dream. And that's what I love so much about the realtors. This is exactly what they were doing. There's a shopping list of people in this room who bought through the realtors and ended up in View Park and Ladera, and of course 3 generations later. These kids don't even know the sacrifices that their people made, because they were shot at, beaten. Joseph Mayfield, the first black broker in Englewood, went up to the Englewood border, was on the 2nd floor, and they beat him with broomsticks and hammered him, and they beat the crap out of him. I mean, they beat the bloody. And so there were a lot of them. Joseph Smith, I think his name. No, Joseph Smith was Marquise Harris Dawson's grandfather. And he was the head of California Association of Real Estate Brokers, but he was in that second wave of realtors that did significant things. And so we kind of got away from all the significant things that they did, and we're now just getting back to doing the things that we need to do, especially in educating our youth that seem to be somewhat wayward. So getting back to the property itself, there was... they would have contests among the brokers, and the ones that sold the most would give 2% of whatever they sold, and they would donate it toward the building. So
that's a backward contest, but I like it.
I like it.
I love it.
It's a little late for that now. But they did, and they would have contests. I have pictures of the contest boards and the ladies saying, okay, Mark Her Properties. We had the first black franchise in the United States. Mark Her, I think they had 4 offices. And nobody had ever heard of that before.
That's the real realtor spirit right there.
Exactly.
That's the realtor spirit all the way.
Yeah, so Marker Properties was what it was called, and they had 4 different locations. I believe our young realtors descendant is Michael Foster's father, was part of that. And Bill Martin, who was really close to the service company, part of that heritage that was handed down to the century, for people to become Century 21s. So typical of us, instead of staying in our own lane, we wanted to go across that bridge, and we did. We started opening Century 21s and other franchises, and so that's kind of where the realtors ended up. I want to say a little more about Lauren Miller. Lauren Miller, as I said, did sue Walter Lamert and the Southwest Board for refusing to sell this property, or even they would let us sell it, but we couldn't list it. We could bring them a buyer, and might or may or might not have been paid for it.
Oh.
So that was the big fight with Lauren Miller and Yvonne Brathwaite Burke, who, as you know, started the museum in CAM and was on the Board of Supervisors for years. And her husband started the LA Marathon. So we're talking about black royalty here. So she was straight out of law school, and they won that lawsuit. And each party got $100,000 apiece. I believe there were 4 plaintiffs. And they got $100,000 apiece. But before they won that lawsuit, the Realtors and I believe, I think it was SNCC, they were laying in front of cars at the board, stopping the Caucasian people from coming out of their board meetings. Wouldn't let them leave, wouldn't let them come in, wouldn't let them leave. And I have a picture of that, them laying in front of the cars, and Walter Lamert standing there. Walter Lamert is another story. He's being hailed as one of Los Angeles' pioneers and a brilliant man. He actually was a Nazi, and he actually was German, and just as USC was actually started by a Nazi. And so these people were controlling LA at that time. And
so let's clear that up a little bit.
Okay.
You said who was standing in front of the cars?
I believe the Southern Power, not Southern Power, SNCC. What was SNCC's initiative?
Okay, SNCC. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but they would chain themselves. They would go in to have their meetings, and you see these old Cadillacs and stuff, and they would chain themselves to the car so that they can leave. And you can see in the pictures they are furious, and they can't even get in their cars and drive away. And so they were supporting this. We had sent people up to the board to join. They wouldn't let us join. So if nobody joins, it's kind of like they'll ask them, if I can't have you, nobody else can have you.
I understand.
Yeah.
So you're saying the Caucasian supporters of the Realtors were being chastised by SNCC, and they were chained to those Caucasian members' cars?
No,
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
The Southwest Los Angeles Board of Realtors ran HUD, Housing Urban Development. They ran all the different entities were all run by realtors.
Right.
So we were never going to get housing.
Okay.
So to back up a little bit to show you the relationship between the West LA or Southwest LA board, when the Tuskegee Airmen came home, they could get student loans, but only to schools where you worked with your hands. They couldn't get into Harvard or whatever with those loans. Service industries. So that was the first problem that we had. Housing and Urban Development would not make them loans, and that really riled up the realtors. And you had people who fought the war, just regular, not Tuskegee Airmen, they came back and couldn't buy a house, and they were trapped. We were like trapped in this zone. And Paul Williams was passing for white a little bit. I don't want to say he did that because he really didn't, but he had a black woman who lived in Beverly Hills. Everybody thought she was white. And her name escapes me right now, but they were building apartments using her money and Bank of America's money, but they didn't know they were building them for black people. So we start to bust out of that corridor because they pushed us back into Watts after they seized the land up in the North Palos Verdes and Torrance area. So Paul Williams, Lauren Miller, not so much Thurgood Marshall, who was Langston Hughes. This was a group of people who got together following some of Booker T. Washington's teachings, but they would meet in Harlem and try to strategize a plan for blacks to regain wealth, because you know what happened after the Civil War. Jim Crow came right back and re-enslaved people. And so even though they weren't slaves, they were treated as slaves and paid like slaves. So they were strategizing. Lauren Miller actually went to Paris with Langston Hughes, and there were a whole bunch of people that went to Europe and actually helped. That's how the whole thing with France and fighting the war on behalf of France happened with black soldiers, and why they're so revered right now in France, because the United States government would not give us guns. They thought the people would turn on them if they had blacks had guns, and they would turn on white people that they may have had a beef with. So they actually fought in World War I and World War II, and were able to carry guns, but only in Europe. So all this racism, Jim Crow was going on, and then the realtors came into being. You're talking about some unsung heroes. These guys, not only did they lay in front of cars, after their buildings were burned down on Western, they just went right back in and rebuilt them and burned them down again, and they built it back up. We have a picture outside the Adobe of the gentleman who kept coming back. And, I think his last name was Smith. And I should have been better prepared with my names for this interview. But so at one time, the Adobe and Consolidated Plaza was the only place black people could go if they wanted to have entertainment. Mm-hmm. You know, I have pictures of Nat Cole's wife, Maria, we had parties there. People got married there. This was the place you wanted to be if you wanted to have an event in Los Angeles, in the area that we were just now integrating. So there's a history there, and a lot of pictures that we all need to go through. Because they were mostly from Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, and Arkansas. Most of the people that came to California, Arkansas, Los Angeles, they brought a lot of New Orleans stuff with them, especially Louisiana. Both Paul Williams and H. Hudson would have been from Louisiana. And they had these dress-up hats, and they would have these banquets where people would dress up and they would get a prize, just like they did in the South in New Orleans at the different parades and stuff. So that was brought from Louisiana, and then you have the other southern states that brought their own flavor to Consolidated. Unfortunately, after they really got up and started rolling, there was a schism about who was dark and who was light. And they felt that the light people, Paul Williams and H. Hudson, and the lighter realtors were telling the darker ones what to do. Because the darker ones, believe it or not, did not want to leave the West Adams district. I think what turned them around a little bit was the burning and slaughtering Tulsa. Mm-hmm. And I think they were thinking, do we all want to be in this area together? Maybe not. Right. And so that was sticking in everybody's craw. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them wanted to go on Wilshire Boulevard, and they did, because they can then go, put their law firms up there, or their appraisal firms would go up there. But the majority of them felt the need to make a statement by purchasing the Adobe.
Now, speaking of that, for historical purposes and the content of the video, what is the actual name of the Adobe? Have that on record.
The Rancho La Cienega o Paso de la Tejera Sanchez Adobe. The Sanchez Adobe at Rancho La Cienega o Paso, P-S-O, de la Tejera. Now let's talk about what that name really meant. It was 40 acres, and that's 40 acres. And a mule really doesn't come from American stuff. It comes from Mexican land grant. Right. So the land grants were broken into acres. 10, 10, 10, 10. That's the 40 acres. And the way they would define the acres, during the Pico time, they would get on a horse, and they had a long chain, and they would ride to something, they would drop the chain. They'd mark it there. Then they'd get back on the horse and take the chain and ride again until they defined what was the 40 acres. So the Sanchez's were actually Mexicans, and they were hired by the Spanish to corral, as I said earlier, to corral the mulattoes that came, and they couldn't believe that they were so successful. They were millionaires. They had cattle. They had they had everything that they could possibly want. They lived in the finest of mansions, and the Spanish hated all of that because they were mulattoes, and not all of them, but the majority of them were mulattoes. So anyway, to make a long story short, the 40 acres was all part of that rancho. It started at La Cienega, maybe a little west of La Cienega, because it includes Ladera, all the way over to Slauson. That would be on our southerly boundary, down to, I think, 3rd or 4th Avenue, and on the North Exposition. So I was pretty big. And so when they played golf there, you were like, wow. But at the time that we bought that building, there was a airport at the top of Overhill and Slauson. And who came to the country club, because it was a country club, and this is where all the white people hung out. He would land his plane. Remember, Hughes is right down at the bottom of the hill, and of course, and he would land his plane, and others would land their plane. And then they would come to what was the hotel over there where Urban League building was. Originally it was a hotel.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not what it is now. And of course we lost that for a lot of reasons, which we won't get into. But anyway, that was the scene. And then of course, you know, Howard Hughes built the Vision Theater in Lamert. So this was all Walter Lamert, Howard Hughes, and all these guys, you know, the hoi polloi of what we call the City of Angels, getting together and creating their own entertainment. So shortly after the Parkview Women's, or before the Parkview Women, it was a golf course. Yeah, and that golf course started, believe it or not, on La Cienega, and they teed off all the way down to Macy's. That was the tee-off place. And if you look at the building now, you see our breezeway. Those were where golf courts came in and went to the back, or came out and rode the golf course down to where Macy's is now, and that's where they would tee off, and they would pay all the way around and then come all the way down Slauson. That's how big that golf course was. Yeah. And once again, once they saw that blacks were moving in that direction, the new owner of the mall, believe it or not, he has an interesting story to tell, because his mother was one of those who fled Baldwin Hills or View Park when the black people were coming.
Oh.
Yeah, and he never understood. They loved their house. They had a beautiful view. But that's what created the suburbs.
Yes.
You know, this racism created San Fernando Valley. It created Orange County and Riverside. And so they migrated to those areas to make sure. And then they would have signs on the tracks that they built out there and said, you don't have to worry, there will be no Negroes will be allowed to buy. And of course, Joe Louis blew all that up. They had something that eventually started with Joe Louis, the boxer, called the Joe Louis Track, which is above Pacoima. Those houses are still there. I don't think people even knew that Joe Louis had something to do with that. But at any rate, we were still marching on, and there's a book called Bound for Freedom. I would suggest that everybody read it. It really tells you some things that you don't know, and you'll be just shocked at some of the things that we put up with and how we overcame anyway. And I think that was part of National Association of Real Estate Brokers and Booker T. Washington. And then when we started the Realtists here in Los Angeles, they decided to join the National Association of Real Estate Brokers as a satellite arm of NARAB. So that's kind of how that started, and that was has been a good relationship for consolidating.
Okay, awesome. So understanding that we have the Adobe in context as to where it's located and some of the history, I believe at one time we said it was the Catholic Church owned it as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did leave out the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. After Sanchez's son, Tomas, and Maria Sepulveda inherited from Tomas's father. They have another adobe in the San Gabriel Valley called the Sanchez Adobe, which I think we should all go visit one day, and they've invited us to do just that. And I did years ago, but we need to go back. But they began to farm it out a little bit. It became a farm, and cows and pigs and chickens, and grew a lot of stuff that made it a working ranch, so a rancho, so to speak. So after Thomas got in a little financial trouble, Lucky Baldwin coming in he was a San Francisco millionaire and had fabulous properties in San Francisco, but came to Southern California and realized the climates were so different. He loved South California, and he also fell in love with California. Lucky Baldwin was kind of a promiscuous kind of guy, had a lot of baby mamas, and paid like over $200,000 in baby mama money in the 1800s, which is a lot. It's a lot of money back then. And his accountant, I think you've heard of the Unruh School of Economics at USC. Yes. Jess Unruh's father or grandfather was his accountant, and he kept warning Lucky Baldwin. But Lucky Baldwin ended up foreclosing. After Lucky Baldwin died, his daughter Anita Stocker Baldwin, whose train is right out here in Stillmore, Lucky Baldwin, if people don't know, he also built the western side of the railroad to go across the United States. And that train, oh my God, it's beautiful. It's just gorgeous. Mm-hmm. But her name was Anita Stocker Baldwin. Mm-hmm. And so they named Stocker Street after her, which is just south of Don Felipe there. Mm-hmm. And after he died, I think she felt that she needed to do something to honor Elias J. Baldwin. Mm-hmm. And the Elias J. Baldwin, and you'll see some pictures of when Lucky Baldwin owned the Adobe, or the property at that time, that you see slaves, but he didn't have slaves. He said he had escaped slaves, he had workers, and he paid them. I don't think he paid them $20 an hour, but he paid them. And they also built, thank you, Santa Anita Racetrack. Elias J. Baldwin had the winningest black jockeys in the history of the Kentucky Derby. Mm-hmm. If you get the Kentucky Derby bill, they'll name their names, but they will never tell you that they were black. There was a big schism with Lucky Baldwin because he felt they should get the purse that everybody else got. Mm-hmm. They should be paid wages. If they paid taxes, they should be paid comparable wages. And there was a big blow up with Elias J. Baldwin about paying blacks. They didn't like that because, especially Kentucky, because it set a precedent for the jockeys that they would hire. So most of those blacks were replaced by Mexican jockeys and diminutive white jockeys, but the blacks got pushed out. But they also made enough money to build beautiful mansions and homes back where they came from, in Arkansas, where they came from. So Elias J. Baldwin was one of the good guys as far as the civil rights movement was concerned. We weren't really calling it that at that time. But it was he was a fair individual, and he was an Irish Catholic. So Anita thought, I don't know if you guys know anything about Catholicism, but if you haven't done everything you should do on earth to get into heaven, we have a place called purgatory. And I'm a Catholic, or was a Catholic. Maybe I'm still a Catholic, I'm not sure, but it's called purgatory. So I think Anita felt by giving it to the Catholic Church, she would be buying Lucky's way into heaven because he wasn't going to get there any other way. So, because he would be down the Calle Los Negros, which is where Union Station is now, and the Chinese and blacks live there together because they couldn't go anywhere else now. If you go to the Chinese Museum down by Alvera Street, they never mentioned the fact that the Calle Los Negros was Chinese and black. And there was a massacre there where Chinese ended up killing a white man, and they massacred them. And so I do have a picture that seems to have come off the wall at Consolidated of the Calle Los Negros, and that's where we all lived. But it was a lot of sin and debauchery, which is why Lucky Baldwin would be on his horse riding from San Gabriel Valley down there to prostitution, gambling, you name it, they did it there. And not just because of the Negroes, of course, but that's what it was called. At any rate, so Anita gave to the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is on the corner of, was originally held there. The altar was on the wall facing the stage, and there was a mural up there of the church, which unfortunately we left some contractors there, and they painted over the mural. And I'm told that it can be resurrected because they use cheap paint. But it was a mural of a person going from earth into heaven, and it shows the heavens. It was just beautiful. It was done with gold leaf. And so the muralist said, well, thank God they used gold leaf because we can uncover that. But I don't know if they want to. That was during, I don't know who was the president at that time. But they gave them permission to paint, and they shouldn't have because the city wouldn't have allowed that. They would have preserved that history. Yeah. So that's how the Catholic Church owned it, and then the Catholic Church, of course, sold it to the Parkway Women's Club. Oh. And what was amusing to me, it was lovingly called the White Women's Club, and but. They would all dress up, and do quinceañeras and all this stuff for the Mexican heritage, but Mexicans couldn't go in the building. It's amazing to me. And I have pictures of them with their sombreros and their...
I think they call that cultural appropriation.
There you go. Say that louder.
Cultural appropriation.
There you go. And so, interesting characters. But I did meet, she was 103 years old. And she was still selling liquor. She was a liquor salesperson.
Oh.
But she was part of the Parkview Women's Club. And she was telling me how they all lived up and down Virginia Road and all those side streets that hit Stocker.
Did she change her position as to blacks between
She
back then
did.
to now?
She did because she was still saying nigger. You know,
Okay.
and I just
Yeah.
didn't bother
Uh-huh.
to correct her.
Uh-huh.
And but she wasn't.
She wasn't vitriol?
No.
Okay.
She kind of felt sad
Okay.
that they left. And but she was a teenager when they left, and she couldn't understand why they had to leave. They had these beautiful duplexes all up and down the side streets, and that's the way they lived. And they walked to their church. They played bingo and did everything that Catholics do in order to have fun. They had, food there all the time in what we call the garden room now. That's where that's how that was created, so that they could have their after church breakfasts and luncheons. And so, but as I said, the Parkview Women's Club, they were actually being courted to leave Los Angeles by the realtors.
Realtors?
Realtors.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why they left.
Okay.
And that wasn't the only reason they left. They were trapped in their own racist bubble, but they did leave. And that's who we bought it from.
Right. Okay, perfect.
And once again, the negotiations were done by one of our realtors, H. Scott Hudson and Paul Williams. Now, right now, I don't think people really realize what a civil rights icon Paul Williams was. He wasn't just, he was in the background, kind of like Kenneth Hahn. Kenneth Hahn, the supervisor, was one of our biggest, German, white on the board of supervisors. Really, really just loved black people. He was the supervisor over Inglewood. And when they seized the land, he was watching all these what it was the word injustices being done to blacks, and was always around and always helping us and always trying to promote us. And now we have his daughter Janice, the Bruce's Beach situation. So there were a lot of people who came through there. There wasn't a politician who was a politician that didn't come through Consolidated. That would be Tom Bradley. You see tons of pictures of Tom Bradley at Consolidated. They had their Wednesday morning breakfasts. First they had it in the West Adams district, and Evelyn can tell you a little more about that. But then they switched them over to Consolidated. So the politicians would come to the breakfast first. Civic leaders, politicians, they would all come there. They would have their events there. And so it was the go-to place. A lot of the young people would come. I had a party there, a lady came back, and I guess she was on her 60th or something anniversary, and she had her wedding there, and she wanted to go back and have her wedding there, and she did. Her anniversary there. So the significance of the property is two separate designations given by the Sons and Daughters of the American West. Now they're saying they're not recognizing that all of a sudden, but there was no Board of Public Utilities, there was no Board of Supervisors, none of that stuff existed in the 1700s.
Yeah, was that 1771, 1770?
77
somewhere in that.
Yeah, 1777, I think. And the plaque says just what the Sons and Daughters of the American West wanted it to say. And so we said, okay, we're okay with that. We have a designation as a historic building, which always helps you get funds from the state. The leadership at that time wasn't smart enough to figure out how we could have parlayed it into, they were kind of angry because they wanted to tear it down, and they almost succeeded in tearing it down. So that is the first one. The second designation was when John Ballard tried to, Mr. Ballard, tried to build condos up there, affordable housing, and they gave us approval. They said they were sick of that old building, and this board of not the board of supervisors, building and safety. Anyway, the building, the planning department gave us the right to build the building. They hit the papers and said, "Oh, finally they're gonna do something with that piece of junk up there," and all hell broke loose. Who's Galanter, who was a city council person at that time, had done her historic research on the Adobe. Nobody tears this building down, she said. And she, unfortunately, was not feeling black people too much. Some black person had broken into her apartment in Venice and had slit her throat from ear to ear. So she wasn't feeling black people. So she basically went to the city council and said, "Here's the secondary. We're going to declare the whole plaza as historic, not just the Adobe."
Okay.
And because we were trying to take the auditorium and
yes.
these people would pay us rent, and then we would have an income coming in to do the things that we needed to do. So the city council passed an ordinance that property had to be held as one. The president at the time signed that, and there is a ruling of public record that you cannot break this building apart or this land apart. It has to be treated as one property, both with historical references as to the Catholic Church that was there, and the Diocese of Los Angeles was going to send me a whole bunch of stuff, but they did not. I don't know what happened down there. There's a lot of stuff going on. Because the church they don't know anything about us. They just know that we're a party house, the priests that are there at the church now.
Oh, okay.
And so we were trying to make sure that we got all the pictures from that time, because the Diocese of Los Angeles does have a lot of stuff on the
Location.
On their
Designations?
Designation, yeah.
Okay.
And they might have pictures of the mural. Mark Alston was the president,
Okay.
and approved it for that mural to be painted over. I was kind of disappointed. He did take pictures of it, and they just didn't think it had a historical. I mean, there was no harm, they didn't think. Why would we want to have pictures of this when we're having a banquet here? We would, yeah. And nobody asked anybody anything, but now we see the significance of the historical context of the building on both parts. So that's where we are with the building.
So we did a great deal of communication relative to the 1800s and all of the history of the building. Now you're nowhere near that old. So can you give us an expression as to what was your first experience with the Realtist, you on a personal level?
On a personal level, the Realtists were having these banquets, and Joseph Mayfield was a whip cracker. And 2306 West 79th Street, that's where his office is, or was. And his kids went on to do just wonderful things. And his son especially, Joseph Mayfield Jr., he owns a ton of property. So that legacy has been handed down through the Mayfield family. His cousin Charles Mayfield ran Southwest College, which Leslie Bellamy and I taught at for like 4 or 5 years. But my first introduction to the Realtors was I was moved to California and moved to the San Fernando Valley. I didn't know anything about black Realtors or any of that. I just lived in the valley.
A Valley girl through and through.
Huh?
Were you a Valley girl?
Valley girl. Valley girl. I lived in Lakeview Terrace, which was really Pacoima. We called it Lakeview Terrace. Anyway, I went to work because my brother is a sculptor, and he was going to teach me to sculpt, and I had to raise about $5,000 or $10,000 to get equipment so he could teach me how to sculpt or whatever. And so I went to work for what was called Security Title at that time. Then it became Safeco Title. And Joseph Mayfield called the president of Safeco and asked them to buy a table at our banquet, which most affiliates did at that time. And the response was, "We don't do nigger welfare here." That's what the response was. Well, that went to the NAACP and the ACLU and the National Organization of Women. And once they got the big mouth and said that, then they were hit with a lawsuit because they didn't have women in positions of power, no managers, we were all, I was making prints, da-da-da-da, boom, da-da-da-da-da, boom.
Okay.
And I worked the night shift because I had 6 daughters, and I needed to be flexible in the daytime, and so I worked the 3 to 11 shift. So once that lawsuit was filed, the title companies lost. They lost on a national level, that they didn't have minorities, not just blacks, and of course women actually were the beneficiaries more than minorities, but they were had to recruit black people all over the country to come to work for the title insurers. And I mean, they were recruiting in the craziest places. I mean, title insurance, you didn't need a degree from Vassar, but that's the kind of recruits that they had. But they came and knocked on my chair and said, "Hey, you know, we got to get a black in the black community." They still had white reps, title reps in the community. The joke was on them because the man that they thought was white was actually a black passing for white, and he was the rep at that time, and I think he left to go into corporate America. And they asked me if I would take a job being an account manager for not necessarily any place a black person walked. It was kind of the way it was. Because I actually started out in Compton, Linwood, Southgate, and I had all the way over here, and so I had this big territory that I had to cover. And having to cover that, I became one of their top reps in the whole United States, which of course they did not like. Didn't like that at all, but they set it up, so that's the way it shut down. So I went to work, and at that time we had title company cards, we had expense accounts, and we had it all. We could only dress a certain way, and I hated it. You know, I got in my car. They filled the cars up with gas. They washed them once a week. You didn't have to do anything. The company, little Ford something or others. Anyway, once I went to a Realtist meeting, I realized this is just a lot deeper than I thought it was. And I started attending the meetings and becoming actively involved, especially with Kenneth Hahn and Jane Valera, who was a realtor who was one of the editors of the Realtist magazine. And I began to listen to their stories and where they came from and what they had suffered. And even at that time, it was like 1972, they were still shooting at people going up La Brea and shooting. I mean, they weren't aiming at anybody, they were just shooting just to harass people that were living in those, moving into those areas. So, in a way, I have mixed feelings about gentrification, because we kind of sort of reverse gentrified, because as I said for this magazine, the gentry were the hoi polloi. They were the people who were rich, who were coming in and taking the land from poor people. We're the opposite. You know, we have affluent black people, and they're being offered more than they, I mean, if they paid $200,000 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they're being offered $2 million. I mean, who wouldn't take that? So it's going to be hard to stop gentrification and not call it racism. But along with that, there's an opportunity for the realtors to teach legacy. Wouldn't it be nice for you to set this up? And they're working on trust right now that will allow them to pull some of that equity out, go someplace else to live, but hand that equity down to a family member. For instance, your mother-in-law. Yeah, that's a classic example.
Yeah. And just on that note, when she did move into View Park, they were still in the 70s. They were still painting the garage doors, messing with the cars.
Yeah, they still were.
They were not welcomed.
I remember when she moved in, and I think she worked for the county.
Yes.
And one of the things I want to say about her is that she made sure that black people got business from the county and the city. Vernon Escrow, all the ones that are no longer there, she made sure that, because she controlled so much property down there and controlled so much, that she made sure that she wasn't discriminating against white, but she made sure that we got into positions that we were never able to enter. So she loved herself some me, because that's how I ended up in a picture with a lawsuit. And people like her ended up testifying and hearings about racism and what was really happening with the Lamerts, and the Germans. Inglewood was a poultry colony and was run by the Germans.
Oh, okay.
So when I say Nazi, I'm not kidding.
No, I know. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
because they were marching down Wilshire Boulevard at one time
Inglewood was
during
German.
that time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so at any rate, I guess the Nazis didn't want us either, so they disappeared.
How far over were they towards the Alpine Village in Carson? Do you know?
In Torrance.
Torrance, yes. Torrance.
Yeah, they were
They were that far over.
Germans. Yeah, they were.
Inglewood?
Torrance was a German town. Inglewood was a German town,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
gradually, as we began to, as people, especially servicemen, I think that's how we actually ended up being our biggest civil rights movement. These guys would get on boats, or they'd be in the Navy, Army, Air Force, and they would come to Los Angeles. There's nothing like they left behind. Santa Monica, down in Santa Monica was actually a blacks-owned ocean down there called the Inkwell.
You know what's funny? So when we did Bruce Beach in Senator Bradford was rallying for that. Some of the responses were like, no, they couldn't have. No, they couldn't have. And it was funny because when they brought us to this land, they wanted the blacks to be on closer to the beach, so that if you got attacked on the shoreline,
right,
they would be the sacrificial lamb, right? And so they wanted to be on the hillside so they can see the boats coming, when this is more eastern background right now.
Yes,
but that was the culture of how we lived. So it's like, of course we lived on the beach.
And that's the same thing in Florida. That's now where we went through the convention. We're at the hotel. That was all black-owned land before they started building those high-rises. Well, just to tell you some good news with reparations. The city of Santa Monica is living up to the fact that they seized that land. I think the Fairmont Hotel is on it now.
Okay.
And they're all pitching in to give the heirs of the people whose land they seized
Okay. Something.
reparations. They're not going to get the Fairmont Hotel.
Right.
But this is like once the Marriott brothers came to us and they wanted to build a Marriott hotel on the lot below us. Biggest mistake, because the condos weren't there yet.
Oh.
And they wanted to give us an interest in a Marriott.
That would have been lovely.
Yes, lovely. And oh no, you're trying to take over. But they didn't realize these are the kind of partnerships that the Urban League entered into and has persevered all these years.
Yes.
And the NAACP has entered into and have persevered because they had that extra income coming in. So the instance that you're referring to is the same in Mexico. No, only Mexicans can on the ocean in case of an attack from the ocean. And you can get a land grant, but you can't get fee title in Mexico. Same mentality. And I don't know if that was because this was part of Mexico that mentality went to Santa Monica. But I was surprised that they so easily just said, no problem, you're right, we did that. We're going to make sure that, 4 generations later, that we make sure that you guys are compensated.
Progress does work. Okay, so in understanding that if we did something on legacy as a stance, what would you kind of add to your visionary statement that would ensure to have CBR's vision that can be achieved within the next 10 years? What would you say to that?
Our vision, I believe, is my vision, and I'm hoping, and this is the city's vision, so some of this we don't have a choice in.
Okay.
Is on the African American Trail coming from the south. There's a separate organization that handles that, and the black billionaire Joseph Smith. Anyway, he's
Robert Smith.
Robert Smith. Yeah, Robert Smith. He's been funding some of that. So that trail would be consolidated, would be included in the African American Trail because this is where we ended up. Once we migrated from the south, we ultimately, even if we went to the service, we actually migrated in the African American Trail. I have been begging Carl to go with me to the Adobe down to on Sepulveda. There's an Adobe in Inglewood as well.
Oh,
yes.
What's the one in Inglewood? Do you know? Okay.
Larry Springs knows about
we'll
it.
find out.
I've talked to Larry, but I don't know the exact name of it. But at any rate, I've kind of lost my track. Oh, to turn it back into Adobe, that would be open 2 days a week. And to completely rehab it, it has to be retrofit That means we've got to go down 100 feet with iron and build it up and then put layers on top of it. We can't just blacktop the driveway anymore because the building of, the excavation caused so much structural damage. I would like to see it go back to that. I would like to see it become as Carl is doing, a learning center for young African Americans and Latinos, because actually the original owners were Mexican. And to teach them to go back to the basics as far as school is concerned. I talked to a lot of our vendors or lenders, and they said if we had, say, a class of 20 kids that would be trained there, we would teach them penmanship going back, because on the computer you never learn to write cursive. So when you get a letter that's written in cursive, you don't get that. So penmanship, civics, which is something that Carl is doing to teach them how important their vote is. Cutlery, and Paul Williams' daughter has a lot of these classes online that you can do. What's the right fork to use? They don't know that. I took my grandkids to dinner one night, and they were like they were using, hammers and nails and stuff. And so we'd be teaching them curtsy. Cursive. Yeah, cursive. Yeah, and then we would also be teaching them anti-bullying classes to teach them what it means to bully somebody else, someone else, what it really means to that person.
Right.
And
well, in this climate, I don't know if you've been watching the news, that'd be very, very impactful for the community.
Yes, exactly. And if you witness our people running around in the South Bay and trying to run through a shopping center, we need to explain to them the ramifications of what happens when you get caught up in a group, because you're caught on an internet site telling you to do something. And we want to teach them also the foibles of the internet, what you should pay attention to and what you shouldn't pay attention to. So I think that we would start, say, in the 7th grade, and they would, every year they stayed there, the bank would give them $1,000. They don't get it, it gets put into account for them. By the time that they get out of high school, they've accumulated enough money for a college education. Now, that was then. Now college has gone crazy. But Kamala Harris says she's going to fix that. So you may need to start before the 7th grade. Yeah, you may need to start earlier. The whole thing with cursing and thinking that the computer, everything that you see there is not necessarily true. And critical thinking, white people hate that. It's not just critical race thinking. It's critical thinking, period. If I do this, what are the ramifications of my actions? And so we have people come in, and I did this with Mr. Nickerson and some other people. We would go to the different schools, and we would teach, I think you guys have done some of that, the different jobs that are in the real estate venue. And we tell them there's not just, Megan the Stallion, and you can wear your dress below your knee, and you can wear your pants up a little higher. All of the things that make them look like gangbangers or act like gangbangers. It seems that our kids especially are moving toward a lifestyle that is, to me, I don't want to call it disgraceful, but our people fought so hard to vote, fight so hard to integrate those hills, and then to watch these kids be so disrespectful.
Understood. Now, in that line of thinking, those who fought so hard, we can just take that on the realtist perspective. As the realtors fought so hard for home ownership, fought so hard for land ownership, what do you want the incoming realtors to say, to take away that this is what a realtist is, this is what I should be, this is how I should respect this particular title? I know it's a trade name, but it does have a reverence in itself, so how would you present that to a new member?
Well, I think present it to a new member, we actually just have to tell the history of how they got there, what they did, and I think we have a list of first African American president of the Apartment Owners Association, first black Tommy Holmes told you about what he was and what transportation. I was the first black in a whole bunch of stuff, you know, that I've never added it to the list because I'm an affiliate, not, you know. First Black Escrow. First Black, it just goes on. And everyone telling you use escrow, but did you know that this is what we did to make sure? I have a picture of the first Black escrow officer, and that office was on Angeles Vista in what Danny Baco's building now.
Okay.
That's where that office was.
Okay.
First Black Superior Court Justice. So I would tell them that there's a wealth of first and barrier-breaking women and men. I want to talk about some of the unsung women that did. The women actually did all the work for the realtors, and the men got up, dressed up, and touched and showed up. And so I want to honor a lot of those ladies whose names are never mentioned. And but they did a lot of very, very hard work. For instance, Jean Valera and Kenneth Hahn, Supervisor Hahn, and Jean were very close. And Jean was a senior advocate for Consolidated. I think we still need to work with public counsel in referring people to them that have been wronged. And we also need to keep an elderly, a senior division that will help seniors when they get, and we've done a lot of that. We've helped veterans. We just have always needed a publicist, and we didn't have that. But someone would come to Jean and say, this person's suffering, so Jean would call me, and there's a senior being put out of her house by the tax assessor. And we changed a lot of laws too. And I bartered in Sacramento with Wiley Stearns and a lot of them. We changed a lot of laws. Some of the laws that might surprise you. The realtors are for beautiful bars on Beverly Hills properties, but people were being killed in the inner city because if the house caught on fire, they couldn't get out. And those are some of the things that we would change in Sacramento, and we're very unhappy. And then one-stop shopping, where if the person had a listing, they could control all of the carpet, kitchen, everything would be controlled by the listing agent. We fought that and won with Rob Wright. So there are a lot of laws that we either stopped or changed, and I was lobbying on behalf of the title companies, and the title companies didn't want them to use their own title company. And of course, you see a lot of title companies now. Back then, there weren't that many. So I would think that we make sure that we're telling them about how prestigious their realtors were, and whose shoulders you really stand on. I think people use that phrase and it becomes trite. You're standing on the side. It really means a lot with this organization.
Exactly. And what would you think, or how could you articulate the greatest honor of being a realtist?
I think the greatest honor of being a realtist is meeting people, brokers who were wealthy, and my mistake in being an articulate person. You know, they had these southern accents, and I thought they were really dumb. And then they would hand me their list of properties, and they would own 25 Burnett Brothers from Arkansas, and their English was terrible. And I made the mistake that white people make. I made judgments, value judgments about people's intelligence based on their accents. And I met a gentleman named Mr. Johnson who pulled me aside, and he said, "Well, you can sell all this property you want to, but the money is making loans." So I learned that from him, that I would make loans. I still do. I'm kind of getting away from it now, but I still make loans to people.
That's a new fact about you, madam. You do loans.
And I don't do hard money loans. I do reasonable loans. I'm just closing one next week. So that my value is they may help me by this. They helped me become affluent, I would say. I think they took me to a level of affluence that I wouldn't have had I not been a realtor.
That's excellent.
Oh, my husband, I don't take anything away from him.
Right.
He had 300 employees in 5 different offices. No, not taking away, but we were like becoming successful together.
That's excellent.
So I think my success pattern comes from that realtor's drive.
Excellent. That's good to know. We're going to take a pause at this time. Yes.
Pause it.
All right, Madam Chow. I definitely appreciate your perspective and giving us that historical content. If we put that into place of where we are right now, I just want to kind of expand a little bit more relative to the civil rights movement and kind of connect where realtors were in that. I know that in in 63, Consolidated was a part of dealing with California's housing discrimination, but in 1968, NARAD itself was a part of the civil rights movement. Do you have any context that you can give us with regards to Dr. Martin Luther King and maybe Willis Carson, Oni Granville, the realtors?
The context with Oni Granville, Tom Bradley, Carson, they supported Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King really was assassinated before we really started our role. But he would come to California, and he was our speaker at several banquets. But they would be fundraisers for him, so we would sell the tickets at some ridiculous price. And at that point, the banks didn't have a problem with paying those ticket prices, and that money would be given to Martin Luther King to further his battle in the civil rights movement. The contact with MLK and Willis Carson, Nickerson, Paul Williams. Sometimes he stayed at their homes when he came here. And then he would preach at their churches, and they would raise money for the civil rights movement. Kenneth Hahn and the Realtors put together an event at the Coliseum, and all the stars, black, white, blue, and green, showed up for that event. Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra did not show up, but Frank Sinatra absolutely through what's the gentleman's name? His picture's on the wall. Anyway, Frank Sinatra gave a lot to the civil rights movement. He grew up with black people in New Jersey, and his mother, who was an abortionist, they lived in the black community. So he had an affinity for black people. He just didn't publicize it, but he gave a lot to the...
His mother was an abortionist or abolitionist?
She was an abortionist.
What does that mean?
That means when you needed an abortion...
Oh, okay, so she actually performed it. Okay. All right. I'm sorry.
At any rate, well, abolitionist was
that's too old. Okay.
But she was an abortionist, so he kind of grew up in that kind of a seedy background with poor people who needed the service but couldn't afford it. So he gave a lot to black people. He also helped to start the first black nightclub in Las Vegas with one of our Realtors members who oh my goodness, I can't believe I can't remember his name. But anyway, they opened a black nightclub because Lena Horne and
Dandridge
and Sammy Davis had to go through the kitchen in order to perform. And they would make our troops that were there to see them perform sit in the back, and only white people could sit in front. So the way they solved that problem was that they opened a nightclub with one of our Realtors members in Las Vegas. It has since burned down, but they would literally, all the people were then coming to see the black stars at the black nightclub. And it was on NCIS because I guess one of the white club owners' wives fell in love with a black jazz saxophonist, and they ended up killing him. And so there's a real history of the blacks in Las Vegas. That's a different kind of history than we have. But the gentleman who owned the properties all up and down Stockard, where Sherry's office is right now, or was, he owned that building and made a lot of money, became a black millionaire. But Frank Sinatra was leaning his money into the Realtors. Charlton Heston, even though he turned out to be a right-wing crazy person, Charlton Heston was one of the people there. Harry Belafonte. That if you get pictures of the, which the Sentinel has, we really have to get into the Sentinel's archives. Ruth Washington was a Realtors and helped us start Women's Council. And so there's so much history there that we need to segment out, segment by segment, and talk about it at that time. But we can't do that without the Sentinel's archives, because the Sentinel, we had our own photographer. We had our own reporter because of Ruth Washington. And Ruth Washington was our attorney's sister-in-law. And so Colonel Washington and her were bought from Kansas by him. Lauren Miller actually was the second owner of the Sentinel. So there's a ton of pictures and archival stuff that the Sentinel has that we need to get our hands on. And Lauren Miller's works are at the Huntington Museum over in Pasadena. They will not let you see his work without a history degree. Because I guess people come in and they steal stuff or whatever. So, but all of his works and papers are over there. So, the very people that were throwing themselves in front of cars at the board were the same people that were on the buses that got burned up when they went on the buses to the south. And some of the same people who, in the Mississippi burning that got killed and their bodies burned in Mississippi. That was the same organization that assisted the Realtists, and we had alliances and allegiances all over the country. And we had, at that time, a lot of Hollywood as we know it. Rita Hayworth, a lot of people didn't know she was Mexican. And, hid the fact that, because she had flaming red hair, that she was Mexican. So a lot of them supported the Realtists as much as they could without ruining their careers. Warren Brando was one of the people. So I look at Kenneth Hahn was one of the people who put that, and the place was packed. You couldn't get it. There were lines going all the way down the street to try to get into the Coliseum to see the, kind of like what they're doing now. They'll get a bunch of bands together and entertainment. Yeah, so Lena Horne, just to bring her into the picture, hung around the Realtist a little bit. She was, one of our Realtors' husband was her lawyer, Nat Cole. He was his lawyer. And the Tap Dancing Brothers, the Nicholas Brothers. He was their attorney and married. Leo Branton actually married Leo Branton's married the Nicholas Brothers' ex-wife. And so there's a lot of pictures that the Sentinel has where you'll see the hoi polloi at the time that were consolidated that we don't have. And so we certainly need that archival. So we need a grant to get a historian to get a hold of all of this. And UCLA apparently has some of our paperwork, which they will not give up. We're trying to get UCLA's grants. So, and we might want to partner with the Black UCLA alumni and the USC alumni.
Okay, we'll look into that. Now, I want to thank you for your time. You've been very helpful. One of the goals and the mission of this, of course, is to inform ourselves, because we want to make sure that the legacy and the history continues in terms of what Realtists are, have been, and the location and so much of the history that we have. We know we're going to take this in sections, because like you said, there's a lot to cover. Thankfully, 75 years plus with consolidated 77 years with Manurap. But my mission is, we see that they're trying to change the books, right? They want to either remove the books from the classroom, or we know they were rewriting history by omission, and all the other things that they do in their tactics to keep African American history out of the classroom setting. So we're looking to integrate our information into the historical book that deals with Black history, and I think it's Black History 360. In that regard, what would you think is most important? Because they're probably not going to give us the whole book, even though we could probably take like at least 3 or 4 chapters worth of it. But if we had a few pages or a couple paragraphs that just you cannot leave out, what would you think we should have in this book to actually memorialize the Realtists and Consolidate specifically?
I think you need to speak to where we were after the turn of the century as Negroes. We were Negroes. And with the people who were trying to decide whether or not to follow Booker T. Washington's teachings, or the gentleman who wanted to take us to Liberia to live and start our own Black state. And most of the people decided not to do that. They would stick with Booker T. Washington and his teachings. Just to let you know, there's a Booker T. Washington building right off of Olympic and Atlantic. And I'm trying to find out, it was built in 1930. And it's owned by Indians now. I'm trying to find out the context of them building it there, who was in that building. And it might have been built because we didn't have any place to go. We were really being pushed, as I said, back into the anything else. And I just think we need to take it decade by decade.
Okay, so have it in chronological order.
In chronological sequence, because different things are happening at different times. They're different, like Santa Monica, we were relegated to Brewster's Beach, to Inkwell. And H. Claude Hudson, one of the founders of the NAACP, turned that around and said, oh, no, we're not leaving here. You told us to stay here. We're going to be there. And that's why they decided to do reparations. Venice, the heirs of the people who built Venice, they're just now, the Santa Monica and Venice they're it's like that. They're recognizing the fact that a black man did build most of the boardwalk in Venice and the houses that are over there built by a black man. And his kids, or his children, and their peers, have been showing up at all the meetings and demanding to get into Ken Bernstein's book. So I bought the latest book, and we're not in that either. So I think what you're attempting to do, or what you will succeed in doing, is important. How could they have had a meeting last week without the Realtors being there? And I did have an opportunity with the Black Film Festival to present the Realtors, and I had just had my surgery, and I just couldn't stay as long as they needed to have me stay. So Dr. Rice was in charge of that. So he is aware of who I am. He's been here 2 or 3 times. Okay. And he is someone through the Bradley Foundation. See, the Bradley can ask for grants. And I said, this is the organization, or this period of time that we want to study. And we've been so fortunate to have so many people that were members of the Realtist organization for the Black Panther. We had the first Superior Court judge. There were just so many firsts, and so many people that did outstanding things and took their lives in their hands. One of our Realtors would sit in his window on a Friday night with a shotgun, because the night riders would come up on Friday nights, and his kids, who really should be getting reparations, were told to lay on the floor because the bullets could hit them, and he was prepared to shoot back in case any bullets came into his house.
Right, and that was in the front of the office, right, what we call the living room, kind of reception area space?
No, if you go, say, up Angeles Listening, you'll see.
No, that he was in. Wasn't he bunkered in the front of Consolidated's office?
No, he was bunkered at his home that he had bought.
Oh,
after Lauren Miller struck down race restrictions.
So it's up Angela Vistas where?
Yeah, he still lives there. The son still lives there. I'll have to get that information for you.
I would like to.
That's something that you might want to talk to him. I think he's disabled. And Mr. Nickerson's great-grandson lives out here, and he's someone else that you need to talk to. He's never gotten over the fact that his grandfather was cheated out of the property there.
Yeah.
And,
definitely need to talk to them.
Yeah, but he did start Golden State Mutual Life Insurance along with Tom Bradley. Tom Bradley did a lot because as a city councilman, he couldn't do certain things.
Up front, right?
Yeah, and then of course Kenneth Hahn, who was undercover brother, was always doing something to help black people. Excellent. And I look at his daughter. I'm very proud of her because she's just like her dad.
Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
She's trying to do the right thing, but sometimes you can't do the right thing. It's too political. So I'm really glad that we just hit the tip of the iceberg.
Right. So I was going to say this is like the broad stroke of things.
Yeah, and I think once we go through all these pictures that unfortunately they put on poster boards of all the events that they did, and some of the things that they said, and the lobbying that they did. Leslie Bellamy, he was one of our presidents, but also went on to be head of the airport, Department of Airports. Okay. And
was that under Bradley or someone else?
No, it was after Bradley. And also he and I are on the Fannie Mae Advisory Board together. Okay. And he really shook up Fannie Mae. I mean, he was a character, and he didn't mind calling races out. And we were sitting in rooms with the hoi polloi of Los Angeles realtors, and they didn't want to give us a piece of the pie. Once Leslie Bellamy got through, they gave us a piece.
They had to. Okay.
Yeah, so Leslie was explaining, how do you drive into my community? You don't buy gas here. You don't use the cleaners. You don't. And yet you're selling these houses.
Okay.
You're letting us sell them, but you're listing them. No. So he would bring up issues like that and how they were like slumlords, because they weren't. And Leslie passed away a couple of years ago, but he was one of the icons.
All right. Excellent.
Realtors. And I won't go on.
Oh.
Are you through filming?
Okay.
We're still going.
Yeah, we're good. But we are done. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for this moment. We'll go ahead and, schedule you for another time
Okay.
so we can get deeper into our decades of history. And thank you for adding to the Realtist Chronicles.
Well, I thank you. And I'm so proud to be a realtor. I really am. I just think that we really need a publicist because we've done so much and people aren't aware of it. And so we really need to make sure that they know that, including Kenneth Hahn Park.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Madam Chow.
You're welcome.